at least 15, maybe 20 years ago. It was one of the early model railroad podcasts. And I was the tips editor for a couple of years. We would collect tips from various sources, and then every show we'd have a short segment and I'd present about 10 or so tips. And I think we got up to about 100 or so, but I'm not going to do all 100 today.
101.
Yeah, I think we did get 100 more. That's never some special meaning to me, but so anyway, what I'm going to do is go through a bunch of tips with the idea that if there's a couple here that are new, that's a good thing. If there's a lot of things here that you've heard before, well, that just means you've been around the block a few times. So, okay. First one I want to start on is cleaning paintbrushes. And over the years, I have to admit, I have ruined more paintbrushes cleaning them than I have actually painting. So what I'm using now is based on a recommendation from a guy who's both a professional artist and a model railroader. He suggests this. Now, can this be seen on the camera?
Keep coming closer.
Okay, because they'll start to lose focus at some point.
Yeah.
I think you better read it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's called the Masters Brush Cleaner and Preserver. And you take the lid off, throw it on the floor, and it's kind of a pasty sort of, it's like a soft soap. So what your brush, wash it through white paper towel till you don't see anything more. Then swish it carefully, swish it around in the soap, clean it off of your hands, and repeat that until you don't see any more. And in particular, what happens when paintbrushes is that the paint, where'd my brush go? Here. Yeah, nice big brush. Tends to get caught up in here. So you want to make sure you get the paint out of the near the ferrule when you clean the brush. Now, the next thing I do, sir.
Is that for solvent and water-based?
I've been doing for water-based, yeah, I should have mentioned for solvents, run it through the solvent first. Get it all as clean as you can through the solvent, and then use the water-based soap. And if you're still seeing any color, go back to the solvent and then go back to the water-based soap. I tend to not use much solvent paints anymore, I suspect, like most people. Now, the last step I do, which makes a big difference in keeping the brushes together, is hair conditioner. And you can see how much hair conditioner I go through. I have a little bottle that I got at a Marriott a long time ago when Marriott still had little bottles of hair conditioner. And I put it in a baby food bottle jar. And at the very end, after the brush is clean, I dip it slightly, switch it around a little bit in the hair conditioner, pull it out, reshape the bristles.
Hair or air?
Hair. Yeah. The stuff I used to have. Yeah. Yeah.
So for sable brushes, that's even better.
Yeah, I mean, it works. I mean, it works best, of course, on natural hair brushes, but it seems to be okay on even synthetics like nylon. It certainly won't hurt a nylon brush. Now, the next tip is for bottles of paint, and this is particularly true for solvent paint like Floquil, is when you're done, carefully wipe off the rim of the top of the jar, the threads, and the lid, and then take a little bit of Vaseline and smear it around the lid, and then tighten the bottle back down. Now, I tend to store my bottles of Floquil upside down. Sometimes you get problems, but in general, I still have bottles of Floquil that are about 25, 30 years old that seem to be okay. Okay, next tip, stirring paints. The Badger or Micromark paint stirrer, battery operated, works really well. Now, this is one of these you learn from experience. When you dip it into the bottle, you have to be coordinated and turn it off before you pull it out. However, if you save toilet paper rolls,
And
you
who
can
doesn't?
put the paper roll down and use that as a collar to prevent some of the spray out. So that way you can mix through the whole top and bottom of the bottle and try to keep some of the paint off of you. So, here's what you do with your old toilet paper rolls. Okay. for thinning water-based paints, I get some distilled water, which is cheap at the grocery store. Add, I like the Liquitex Flow Aid. Kodak Photo Flow is the same kind of thing. I mix that up and put it in a, the pull top kind of water bottle. And then I take some of it. My wife used to do contact lenses. This is a contact lens bottle. But if you can find a small tip water bottle of some sort, take it, clean it out, put that wet water in there. And then if you have to add a drop of water to a little bit of water-soluble paint, it's real easy. So another tip is label everything. Don't ask me about that one either. Okay. Let's see. These little cheapo plastic pallets work really well. But something that I use a lot, it's going to be hopefully hard to see. I'll pass this around. This is a silicone mini cupcake baking paper, basically. And I use it two ways. I'll use it as a palette, put a little bit of paint and maybe a drop of water, mix it up. Or I'll set it upside down, put a drop of glue on top. And I have tried, I think, every glue I have, and with the possible exception of epoxy, and nothing sticks. Now, CA is kind of hard to get off, but eventually it will come off. Let me just pass this around so people can kind of feel that. And they're cheap. You get them on Amazon like everything else. And I think a lifetime supply of like 40 of them will cost you $4. Okay. Color matching. I should have brought a picture of this. If you go to a website for pretty much any color of paint, Vallejo, Badger, Golden, Liquitex, sometimes you can order by a big paint chart. It shows all their colors. That's really handy thing to have. And it's particularly handy to have several different lines of paints. Now, I still have one of the old Floquil paint cards that had little chips of the actual paint on it. And two of those chips have fallen off. I don't know where they are. Fortunately, not colors I care about. Another guy sent me the paint chips from a Floquil rack. Those I sent off to a guy in England who's looking to color match and maybe produce a line of paints that is color matched to Floquil paint chips. But if you want to just get fairly close, in particular, the Vallejo line is really extensive. Most hobby shops ask and see if they have or can get you the paint chip chart, and that's a very, very useful thing to have. Now, if you're an artist, you learn how to mix colors. There are some good videos on how to do this. Or you can do what I did. You marry an artist and you say, honey, can you please match this paint for me? But seriously, learning a little bit of color theory is definitely worth the investment. John Seacoast has been running a monthly online, he mails it out, magazine, PDF. And a guy's been doing a series of columns on color theory where he talks about hue and intensity. And in particular, he says, look, if you're trying to match nature, here's how to think about color. Here's how the colors vary in intensity. Here's how they vary in hue. And learning a little bit of color theory, because there are some good videos now, is worth doing. And that way, in particular, one thing you'll learn very quickly is you never use pure black or pure white, especially not pure black. The artist colors have a range of percentage, 10% to 90% black. I find a good scale black is about 80%. A good weathered black is about 60 to 70%. You can find these, go online, search for shades of gray, not 50, just 10 shades of gray. And you'll eventually find one of these charts that show you from 90 to 10. And that's where, again, that's another color chart worth having. Okay. Let's see. The thing I like to do on my workbench, I do most of my assembly on a piece of sheet glass. I tape around the edges, and that does two things. First, it gives a little bit of protection, and secondly, it raises the glass slightly above the work surface. And if you want, you can put your drawing or plan underneath. At the end, you can clean it off just by taking a single edge razor blade and running it across the surface of the glass. And that'll take everything off, including epoxy. But it's nice, flat, that's really important, easy to clean. Sometimes I'll put little drops of glue or mix some paint on it if I'm just doing a little bit of paint. But a piece of glass, depending on your work surface, 12 by 12 or so, is definitely a superior work surface. Now, another thing I did, and I thought about taking a picture of this, but then I would have had to do slides. Just in front of the glass on my work surface, I have a little strip of Formica that's about 12 inches long, about 4 inches wide. And I do most of my cutting on that. And it gets chewed up pretty badly. So every 6 months, every year, I carefully scrape it off, cut a new little piece of Formica from scrap, because you're obviously not going to, don't care what it looks like, and glue it back down. And that makes a really nice cutting surface. It's a little hard on the knives, but it's a nice surface to work on for cutting and shaping and sanding and filing. Okay. Now, particularly on plaster models, but also resin castings, a lot of times you want to sand them flat. So the thing to get is a stone tile. And this is important. You want a stone tile, not ceramic. Piece of marble here, I think. Yeah, marble. And then spray glue a piece of sandpaper to this. The reason you want stone tile is because it's been honed perfectly flat. Now, I put a piece of plywood with epoxy on the back to give this some more sturdiness. Stone will, of course, break and shatter if you drop it, but it's still not going to shatter as badly as glass. You can do this to a sheet of glass, again, to get a nice flat surface. But I like the stone except for the weight. And then, of course, you can run it around. And to clean this off, particularly when using plaster, it tends to get really badly loaded. I'll take a brass brush and just hold it over a garbage can and brush off the extra plaster. But I use this a lot when I want to get a flat back. Also, if I build a structure and it's a little wobbly, I will carefully run the entire structure, because this is big enough that for most buildings, you can rub the entire, essentially, foundation of the structure over the sandpaper and level it out.
What grid do you like?
I actually have two. One with, I think it's 120, and the other with 180 or 200. Mostly I'm using the 120, the kind of intermediate, because mostly I'm trying to reduce rather than smooth out. The different grits, of course, the higher the grit, the smoother you get. So I find 100 to really 120 is a good grit for smoothing things out. And buy high quality sandpaper. Since you've glued that on place, you don't want to have to pull it off and replace it because your cheap sandpaper wore out. Okay, a good work surface. Every so often, if you go to a furniture store, or not furniture store, like a used furniture store or a Goodwill store, look for a rolling kitchen cart. That's a butcher block top, wheels on the bottom. That makes a really nice auxiliary work surface. It's butcher block, so you can cut on it. You put a piece of glass on it for assembly. You can put your tile on it. You can put tools on it, and you can roll it out of the way when you're done. Now, I have an old 4-inch house painter's brush. It's kind of scunchy. I use that as a cleaning brush. And because it's a good quality artist brush, or it was, it'll take a lot of fine dust, because we produce a lot of fine dust with modeling. And just pull that up to the work surface and use the paintbrush to get the clean work surface off the sawdust and put it back in the trash can. Okay, now I talked about that piece of laminate. Said I usually don't care what color it is, but when it starts to get hard to find parts, I will just actually use Rust-Oleum white paint. Rust-Oleum because it'll cover quite well, and just paint the surface of the Formica or whatever you're using for your cutting and assembly surface. Paint it, let it dry, and then you can find parts, because after a while, NBW castings get really hard to find when the work surface is badly nicked. Okay, I did a whole show of tips of things to buy at craft stores. So here's some of them. Flow Aid, the Liquitex product in the fine art section. That's what I like to use for making wet water. Plaster wrap, jute thread. The beading section has a lot of really interesting stuff. Now in the sewing section, you can find these little cakes of beeswax. And what sewers use is they run their thread through and it pulls some of the fuzz off the thread. But what I use this for is for lubricating micro drill bits. Just stick it in there and you'll be surprised, especially when drilling resin, how much difference this makes and how well the drill goes in. And this is a lifetime supply. I buy a lot of little Ziploc bags. I wish vendors like Tichy and San Juan and those people would put their NBW and the other parts in Ziploc bags. Since they don't, I do. And then I actually have built a shelf with bins, with dividers to hold all of that stuff. But Ziploc bags are your friends. Now, I talked about the bead section. One of my favorite things in the bead section is this locking. Here's the lock button. Bead box. You push in the button, and then you can click open the box. This usually, but not always, prevents the problem when you drop it and everything comes out. Let me just pass this around so people can look at that. Those have become hard to find, but are absolutely worth it. If you're storing NBW castings, little tiny screws, anything that's really small, in particular, anything that's really small where if you dump them over, you might say bad words. It is worth finding a locking bead box. Okay. Let's see. I talked about brushes. I found kind of 3 categories of brushes. Really good red sable brushes, #1 fine point for detail work. I like bristle brushes for a lot of weathering, for dry brushing, things like that. And then nylon brushes are good for large surfaces. Again, these can be useful for dry brushing. And then finally, chip brushes for stuff you want to throw away. But particularly the red sable brushes, it's worth a #1 or a #2 pointed brush. And the other brush, sorry, I should have brought this, that I use is called an angle shader. And if you know what a sash brush looks like from a house painter, it's basically a brush that is angled. And you can get those as small as 1/8 inch. They're a little hard to find. Those are the best brushes for getting into and painting the window frames on a structure. So spend a little bit of time at the art supply section. And if you can get to a really good art supply store, like in Boston, I think there's one in Portland or whatever, it's worth spending a little bit of time looking to see the wide assortment of brushes. Okay. I should have brought those too. It took me a long time, but I finally found metal triangles about this big. So, 4 to 6 inches on their maximum length. And metal for 2 reasons. One is they're a lot sturdier, and 2 is if you actually get solvent paint near them or glue, it won't bother them. When you buy metal triangles, you want to buy a 45-degree triangle and 2 of the 30, 60, 90s. That's why I wish I thought to bring the triangles. There's an old Draftsman trip is if you take the triangle this way and invert it the other way, you have essentially parallel bars. And that's really good sometimes. But finding metal triangles and metal rulers can be a bit of a challenge. X-Acto blades, buy them in bulk and throw them out if you're at all worried about whether or not it's getting dull. In fact, it's a good idea before you start any project, change your knife blade.
Where did you get the metal triangles? You know?
I got them, I think, a meal order. I think I got them on Amazon.
I think Micromark.
Yeah, Micromark has them. They're a little expensive. You can, as the old saying, go shop around. And also a good drafting supply or a good art supply store may have them.
Harbor Freight has them too.
Oh, good. Yeah. Now, I did a whole show once on safety tips, but this is the one I want to leave you with. This is an old plastic nail container. So it can hang up on the shelf. And what I did is I cut a notch in the top. And this is my sharps bin. So this is what you do with all of those leftover X-Acto blades. Always. Otherwise, your finger will find the point of the X-Acto blade you put in the trash can. And when you're done, tape the box up and throw it in the trash. This is about 2 or 3 years worth. So, one of these lasts quite a long time. Okay. Another thing to find at art supply stores. Where did I put them? Did I not bring those? No, here they are. Are palette knives, and they come in 2 flavors: cheap plastic and expensive metal. And these are the 3 sizes I use most commonly. This originally had a round tip, but I cut it into a chisel tip. It's cheap, it's like 69 cents or 79 cents. So cut them up as you need it. I have both a metal and a plastic, kind of a pointed trowel shape. And I have a metal, very flexible, kind of chisel shape. And I use this one a lot because I can get it close up to an edge, is I can lay it down, for instance, alongside of the building and then push some scenery materials back away. This one cost me a couple bucks, but was worth it. And like any tool like this, you want to clean it immediately after use because it can stain despite being stainless steel. And some of them will rust. But again, that's a good thing to go look for at an art supply store. Now, another thing in the fine arts department, there's a kind of artist paint called gouache. Gouache. This is neat stuff. It's a watercolor that's opaque. And the way they make it opaque is they mix in really, really finely ground marble. And this one, I talked about shades of gray. This is neutral gray number 2. I'll pass this around so you can see what the color is. A tube of neutral gray gouache will cost you online about $4 or $5, but is worth it. This is what I use for mortar, is I put a little bit in my little plastic baking cup, thin it down to the thickness of about maybe milk, run it over the building, let it settle in, let it almost dry, then carefully wipe it clean. And because this is a watercolor, if you don't like the results, wet paper towel and start over again. So a cheap set of gouache, which is what this is from, is really fun stuff to play with, but then go out and buy a medium neutral gray just because it's easier than mixing it, especially if you want consistency. Sir?
Dave, do you ever, for your mortar blend, do you ever put a little alcohol in? Have you ever tried that?
I haven't tried that, but I will use my wet water, which helps. I talked about the wet water in the dropper bottle. But alcohol would be interesting to try. I don't know how alcohol would work with the gouache. It might get funky. Instead of dissolving it, you might get that kind of clumpy. But it's worth a try, absolutely. Now, Liquitex, I think. Either Liquitex or Gold, one of the two fine arts brands are come out with acrylic gouache. So it has the working properties of gouache, but then when it dries, it's more or less permanent. And I've bought some bottles of that. I'm still playing with it. I can't say I can have a strong recommendation, but a lifetime supply artist set of really cheap student gouache will last you for quite a long time. Then if you like that stuff, you can get other colors that they cost you a bit more.
Oh, right to Japan to get this stuff. And it's made in Japan.
Well, everything's made outside of the US, but I think I got that. I think I got that from Dick's Art Supply. Let's see. Talked about the palette knives. Okay, all right. Now we're going to leave craft stores and go to an automotive store. I call this stuff Barney juice for the obvious reason. It's super clean automotive degreaser. Cut this 90% with water, stick it in like a mason jar, old spaghetti jar, and use this to clean resin castings, styrene, full strength. It's great to clean your grill. I got super spousal points to use this once cleaning the oven. But this stuff it's a little nasty, but it's a good all-around cleaner. It's particularly good for cleaning resin castings. Yeah, especially if you're using it full strength. And what I do is usually if I'm cleaning castings, is I pour it into a glass banana bread container. So, and then pull the parts out, wash them off, and then dump the remaining cleaner back into my spaghetti bottle. So I get a lot of use out of a 1 gallon jug of super clean because I'm cutting it and then I'm taking the residue and putting it back in. Okay. A set of cheap plastic measuring cups is handy, particularly for doing plaster. I guess I don't have to say any more about that. It should be pretty good. Okay, same thing, a cheap wire whisk. Don't use your wife's because the plaster tends to stick and will corrode actually metal if it stays on too long. An old trick is to take a cheap, particularly if one has started to deflate, beach ball, cut it in half, and that makes a nice flexible mixing bowl for plaster. Another thing to find, again, don't steal it from your wife, is a tea strainer. If you're trying to clean really small detail parts, put them in a tea strainer, you know, some like they have the cup version that opens up, the tea leaves go in, clamps back down, or the little ones that you pour the tea over, and use that to hold your parts. Now, another thing that's hard to find, and I think I finally found this on Amazon, this obviously is a little metal funnel, but what makes this one unique is that there's no rim on the inside, which means that when you pour something in, it all goes down instead of having that ring around the collar that a cheaper metal funnel will leave. It took me a while to find this, but that's really good. Again, I use this for stains, Vitero stains, the Hunterline stain. Let me pass this around so people can stick your finger inside and you'll feel what I mean about the absence of a lip. Okay. What are you doing on time?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm doing on time.
How you doing?
Jay.
Oh, keep going.
Okay.
Plenty of time.
All right. Now, I'm probably starting to get to things that most of you know, but let me just repeat them. If you're assembling a building or any kind of a box or a box car that's a 4-wall box car, the way to do it is to assemble an L from each side. So you do 2 halves, right angles, and then bring the 2 right angles together. And that'll give you your best alignment. Did I bring, yeah. The Kaufman corner clamp works okay. It's one of those things that when I first saw it, I said, this is super. When I started using it works okay. It's not the best thing, but I still don't know of a better way to get a actual clamp in a corner. And don't be afraid to add sticks or spacers in here as you need to get around the edges. One of the nice things about this is that it does have the slot in the middle. So when you have a wall up against here, the two sides of the wall come in, you can run a line of glue down the middle. Let's see. We all have probably a variety of weights and square or rectangle things, 1, 2, 3 block.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. Yeah. I've seen them. This one is threaded. Never used the threads. It's got nice weight to it, and it fits nicely just on because it's 1 inch. It fits nicely to hold down track. It's a little bit wider than track gauge for HO. I have a gazillion different size of L blocks, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inches. I use the 1 inch and the 2 inch a lot. Another kind of square is a flat square. This is really handy for doing alignment, for checking vertical. It's thick enough, it will usually stand up of its own. But it, there's obviously no lip on here. So they're again a little hard to find, but 2 or 3 of these are really handy.
Where did you find those? Do you remember?
I think I got this, I think Amazon. Now this one is a Micromark exclusive. This is their thin beam square. Absolutely, if you're a scratch builder, you absolutely need at least one of these, preferably 2, so that you can find it when you're working. And I use this a lot. I wish they would make a smaller one.
The difference was significant.
I didn't bring a regular. Most squares, machinist metal square, have about a 1/2 inch thick base. This is 040. So it fits just right on top of 040 styrene, on top of 1/16 sheet, instead of having the big offset you get with a traditional square. This is something I just found on Amazon. A 45-degree triangle square. It's nice because it stands of its own. Or if you want to use it to line up something at a 45, particularly cutting, or to set a saw blade or something like that, or to do an assembly. Sometimes you want to assemble a corner. Let's see what else in there. One more, 2 more things in that line. There's a company, Canadian company, that also sells in the US called Lee Valley. They do woodworking tools. They do garden stuff. It's all really, really good quality stuff. Not cheap, but you get what you pay for. And one thing that they have is a little setup block. So you can see the sizes here. I'll pass this around. But basically it's 3/4, 1/2, 1/16. This is good for doing saw setups, which is its primary use. It's good as a corner square on a piece of strip wood. So if you have a mark on this side, and you want to transfer it to this side, you just line up this little square on one side, you can get it on the other one. And it's small, so you can do this on even as small as 1/8 inch without going too crazy. It's also good, I just was using it to set trestle bents where I had very little working space, but I wanted to make sure the bents were plumb. So, and perpendicular to the center line of the track. So I used this and aligned the bents to it. The other thing, similar kind. Now I bought this in Japan. I thought, oh, isn't that cute? And it turned out to be really handy. And I found there's a company that sells these on Amazon, slightly larger. You look at this, you think, nah. But again, if you're working with small materials, this is relatively a thin beam. It's small, so you can get in and work on a piece of strip wood, a piece of, 1/2 inch wide things. This one happens to have a nice little hole for hanging too, but a really small square turned out to be more than just cute. It turned out to be a lot of use. Now, I've just been working on a trestle project. And what I did is after I drew the bent, is I built one by taking the plans, putting them onto a piece of, this is 1 inch thick balsa. Thick balsa is getting hard to find, with little balsa blocks and thin needles, and build a jig. Since I was doing, ended up doing, I think, 9 bents. I built the first one here. I went back and checked that it was correct. And then since I was building the bents out of wood, I built a styrene assembly template. So if you're just doing 1 or 2 things, working on plans on a balsa works really well. If you're building more than about 3 things, building a more or less permanent styrene a jig is worth doing. Now, if I were doing assembly on this bridge in styrene, I would have done the jig in wood, little piece of plywood or basswood with wood pieces. But the idea being is you use something that the assembly glue won't stick to. Okay. Let's see, what else have I got to talk about? So what do you do with a spray paint lid? You can turn it into a holder on your workbench. And I have 2 of these. One of them has fingernail files and toothpicks. And the other one has larger craft sticks and little micro brushes. And these are the kind of things that you want to have handy. And particularly the micro brush, have lots of them so you're never tempted to reuse them. Now, actually, these are not micro brushes. These are makeup applicators. And they're a lot cheaper when they're called makeup applicators than when they're called micro brushes. Okay. My brother, the carpenter, said, you can't be too rich, too strong, or have too many clamps. I just want to highlight 2 clamps that I use a lot. The brass bar clamps, short and long. And these little clippy clamps. These are particularly good when you're doing bracing. If you're doing bracing along the edge of a structure, wall, or something like that, a handful of these will hold them down quite nicely. You can't have too many clamps.
What your brother said.
That's what my brother said. Now, the other thing I use a lot in model is this size and the next larger size, one-handed quick grip clamps. And the lesson I've learned on these is buy the good ones. The company has changed hands a couple times, but the label design's the same. It's blue and yellow. The cheap ones don't work anywhere near as well. They don't give you as much clamping power. They're not as smooth, and you really want really nice control when you're clamping a structure or a model. So investing in a set of these, I have 5, and I often will use, when I'm putting walls together, I'll use the bar clamps in one dimension, and then the one-handed clamps in the other dimension to put the entire building together. And that's where I've got, all of my clamps in play. Okay. Let's see. I should have mentioned this earlier, but a nice, really cheap and portable assembly system is picture frame. Because I talked about glass as a working surface, and this has 4 nice right angle alignment points. And you put your structure in position, make sure the frame doesn't fall apart on you. And then you can push a 1, 2, 3 block, a right angle block, or whatever, up to align against the edge of the frame. And for a while, I was traveling a lot. Once I actually put together, because I was going to be away for a long weekend, a working kit that included this and some files and some X-Acto knives and built some stuff in the hotel room.
Glass.
Yeah, don't get the one with, yeah, don't get acrylic, get real glass. Now, this may be the one, I don't know if I made this one up or I saw it somewhere, but this is my all-time favorite tip. Paint paddles with pressure-sensitive sandpaper. The way I do these is I fold it over so that one edge has got sand on it and the other edge is, I think the term is blind. And this allows me to sand right up against a wall. I have rolls of, this is 120 and this is 80 grit. And I use these in almost every modeling project that I work on with wood, plaster, styrene, pretty much anything that you have to shape or sand. And you have to replace the sandpaper, depending on use, but these are both getting to the point where they're about ready for replacement. But partly because I use them so much. Oh, I forgot to bring the Vixen file. Russ Green, New England Brownstone. When I was working on plaster kits, he said, go buy a Vixen file. I'm sorry I didn't bring this. This is a specialized file. It's used a lot in auto body. And if you know anybody who works in an auto body shop, maybe if you're really nice, he'll give you one that's kind of worn out. What it looks like, instead of having the kind of the crosshatch that a conventional file has, this has curves on it. And it will cut aggressively but smoothly on plaster. So if you're working with a plaster building and you want to get that edge squared up, this Vixen file is absolutely worth finding. And I think I ended up paying $15 for one, but it was worth it because I was doing a fair number of plastic kits, and I'm sorry I didn't bring that. Because once you've seen it, you'll know where you'll remember this kind of curved file shape.
The plaster or plastic?
I use it mostly on plaster. It's a little aggressive for styrene, but if you're working on thick styrene, probably 1/8 inch or thicker, or 1/16 or thicker, it'll work pretty well. But mostly and I have used it on resin buildings too, because again, they're fairly thick. But mostly it's just super for squaring up an edge on a plaster building. Okay, let's see. What else have I talked about? Okay. Now, we've implied when we talked about these kind of blocks is they're useful for assembly and they're useful for weights. Well, one of the nicest weights you can do is take a sturdy Ziploc bag, fill it full of, in this case, recycled lead shot, or just sand. And this is the thing to hold a roof down in place. I have a couple of these. And, and speaking of shot, it's a little hard to find, but I found online, you can find people, or if you know a gun club and can buy recycled shot. It's cheaper when it's been through the shotgun. Okay, what have I got left here? Oh, let's see. Just a couple of application tricks. For a while there, my wife was really into this product called Butter Buds. And I ended up with 30 or 40 of these. So she was just dumping on everything. It's a sprinkle top bottle. This is a great thing to hold foam or turf or any of those kind of scenic materials. But for ballast or stone, I like ketchup bottles. And I actually will buy these bulk online so that I can basically keep a row of different colored ground, dirt, stone, ballast. And you want to open up the tip a little bit. I'll pass this around so people can see how much it opens, so that the stone material will pour out, but not come gushing out. So, a little bit of practice, you'll learn how wide you want the tip open for the size of the stone you have in there. But those work really well, especially for ballast. And so what I'll do is I'll lay the ballast with the squirt bottle, and then I'll use a 1-inch nylon brush to shape it. Okay, I'm about done here. Two more things. This is my super glue kit. It's a little jelly jar with some BBs in it, which make it nice and heavy so it's not going to move. I took an embroidery needle, and I usually have about a 50% failure rate. Cut the top off so you get a little tiny fork. And you put a drop of CA here. You can then pick it up with capillary action in the fork and then run this along the joint. And that will give you nice, even application of CA, of either, the really runny CA or the medium viscosity CA. This works for both. And to clean it, so a flick of the Bic, hold the tip at the top of the flame, just long enough that the CA catches fire. You'll see it burn off. And then when it cools down, clean it off your fingers. And if necessary, dig out any leftover carbon from the burned off CA. I'll pass this around here. So you can see I guess, we'll leave the Bic. People know what a Bic is. And then I'll conclude the tip I got from the late Craig Biscayr, who was one of the hosts of the Model Railcast show. It's actually 3 tips in 1. So this is my assortment of micro drill bits. I usually buy these in bulk from the Gyros brand on Amazon. They're more expensive, but they last longer. They're permanently, the sizes I use, 80, 79, 78, 77, 76, 75, 74, 72, 68, 67 are more or less permanently chucked in here. This is just a piece of wood with a drill press, 1/4 inch hex shaft. Buy these from Micromark. This is a case where it is worth paying for the Micromark quality, because I bought some from a tool vendor and they weren't concentric and you got drill wobble. This is the piece of wood is stuck on another piece of plywood, which gives you a little bit more stability. So you won't knock it over because those are still fragile. And then to drill holes is a low speed trigger finger battery operated screwdriver. And I have successfully drilled a full boxcar's worth and not broken a drill bit. Because, the drill bit is doing the drilling. The trigger makes it easy to hold. I lubricate the bit in the wax. And, if you're doing a boxcar with a grab iron ladder, that's what, 50 holes. And your hand can get awfully tired with a push drill, but this makes fairly short work of it. And, it's battery operated, charge it up. This is actually my second. The thing is to find one that's slow speed, 300 RPM or 280, somewhere in there. That makes the drill, that gives you more control. You don't want a fast screwdriver. Okay, have I got anything I've not talked about? No, I think I have run out of toys. So hopefully you learned a tip or two. If so, it's successful. If you knew all these things, great. Come and give me your tips.
Well,
So
how about
thank
some
you.
questions?
Yeah.
Ready for the exam?
Yeah, one question.
Yeah.
I
A friend?
want to see your drill bits.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I've seen them, I've never used them.
Yeah. I actually have 2 sets. I have also, again, another Micromark product are just small, very small, 0 clearance pin vices. So I have one set of drill bits permanently into the hand drill pin vices and another set permanently into the hex shaft. But I tend to use the hex shafts more often, partly because they're there. If you look carefully, you can see, although it's a little worn out, the pieces of tape where I put the numbers on. on the little screwdriver or pin vise things, I use a color code. Another thing I should have brought, I'll actually send the link around. I have an Excel spreadsheet in HO scale that has feet and inches, decimal, fractions, wire gauge, all of these kind of line down. So I want to know what's the closest wire gauge to HO 2 inches. I can go to this chart and find it. If I want to know a 2x4 or a 4x4 is about what decimal or about what fraction. That way I've got it all, and that's one of those things that is pasted onto my workbench. And then the other thing I have is the color code I use in my drill bits is also there too. So I should have brought that. What I should have done was printed them out and handed them out, but I'll do that next time. Any questions? Sure.
Have you tried, or have any experience with, it's called liquid water or liquid weight? It's made by Rocket or Roquet, depending on how you want to spin it.
No, I think I have some.
It's really, really fine lead shot.
Is it lead or tungsten?
I'm pretty sure it's lead.
Yeah, because actually we were having a discussion in one of the forums. Tungsten is substantially more dense than lead.
Yeah.
Tungsten is about the most dense non-radioactive thing you can get. So if you look at by a fair amount, I forget what the numbers are like 12 for lead and 18 for tungsten, so it's like 40 or 50% more dense per cubic unit. So you can get liquid tungsten, which I think is a similar thing. You get tungsten clay or you can get tungsten beads. And this is used a lot by guys who are serious about Pinewood Derby. But again, you go on to Amazon or wherever and do a search for tungsten weights. And you can find a moldable plastic, kind of a clay. It's tungsten clay, I think, or tungsten shot. And that's preferable to lead. Bit more expensive. It's slightly, but not a lot safer to work with. But that's probably the stuff you want to do if you're trying to do a lot of weight in a really small space, like the underside of a gondola.
Yeah, or a flat car.
Or a flat car.